I've always wanted to go on a search for answers, if you like. And I guess one thing leads you to the next thing, which leads you to the next thing. And I think a lot of people in the audience understand that everything looks really big, but when you just go on a journey that takes you one step at a time, it becomes a lot easier. So for me, it was about understanding a little bit more of the metaphysical and then a little bit more and a little bit more. And before I knew it, I was well advanced into understanding that there's much more to us than meets the eye.
And when you talk about metaphysics, what is that? So, are
Mm.
there things beyond our understanding of the real world?
We see the world in 3D around us, but there is so much that can't be measured. If you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, for example, we can just see like 1% through our human senses. There's all of these other waves out there. There's X-rays and infrared and ultraviolet, all of these other things that we can't see. There's so much more happening around us. So for me, the metaphysical is just the pieces that we don't realize are there. A lot of people, and I know that you've had a lot of guests as near-death experience, people who've had a near-death experience, and what they see is they see another world and they see the light at the end of the tunnel. And all of this is accessible to us in ways that we don't understand. Let's look at love, for example. How do you touch love? How do you feel love? How do you see love? You can't, but you know it's there because there's a feeling that comes with that. So I think a lot of the metaphysical is closer than we realize. And what it shows us is that we are metaphysical beings in a landscape that goes beyond the physical. And I think that we have potential yet to be discovered. Everybody does. Everybody has hope beyond what we're shown.
And are our lives influenced by this reality that we cannot see?
I feel that it is. Um, Psychic people can tune into some of these extra dimensions. A quantum physicist will tell you that there's 11 different dimensions in string theory. People will talk about other realities and the many worlds interpretation, how the universe continues on in different forms. All of this has got to be based on something. Once we understand that there is more to us than meets the eye and we start to explore that, then some of these doors tend to open for us. A big example of that is people who've lost somebody close to them, and grief is very much a part of the human form. But so often we get messages from the other side, whether it's through a psychic, whether it's experiences of dreams, we feel a presence. Some people hear a favourite song, some people smell the aftershave that they shouldn't be able to smell. All of these things around us tell us that there's more to this world than we know.
And how do we start, attuning our senses to be more in touch with these other dimensions?
I feel that the first thing we need to do is to get out of our heads and into our hearts. And the head is very much limited by our belief systems, by our conditioning in life, by our fears and trepidations. We have been cultured to stay small in this world. But there is so much more to us than we know. I believe that the heart is limitless because it has an energy that is profound, and the heart, I believe, is the window to the soul. Some say it's the eyes, and that's good too, but for me it's the heart that holds the true power. When we move into our heart and we trust our intuition, we trust our feelings, then I believe another world opens for us. So the first thing is to get out of our mind and into our heart and into the energy field around us.
I love that. And also, it brings me to think of the fact that, a lot of us will have different voices in our heads. We'll have our intuition, but sometimes you also have that voice that's very much fear-based, right? That's saying, do this or don't do that. And you sort of know that that's your brain trying to keep you safe and trying to keep you in that safe space. How do we distinguish intuition
Hmm.
from survival mechanism?
That's a great question. There is certainly a survival mechanism, and it is good to listen to that survival mechanism at times. But it's great to know the difference between what is our survival mechanism, what is our intuition, and what is our conditioning. And I'll give you an example. I remember I have children in their 30s now, and I remember when they were very small, and one of my daughters wouldn't finish her dinner. And I said something to her that brought this into my line of sight. I said to her, "Finish your dinner. There are children starving in Africa." And then I stopped and I thought, where does that come from? And I thought back, and that was what my parents said to me when I was young. And so it just came out in that moment, and I stopped myself, and she helped me. She looked into my eyes and she said, "Can we send this to them?" And that was what it took for me to realize my conditioning, and that we just repeat things that have been part of our own formative years. And to find that conditioning and set ourselves free from the conditioning is something that helps us to strengthen the intuition, because we haven't got as much other information in the way. So if we can get rid of our conditioning, and if we can reduce our fears, I mean, you don't walk down a dark alley at night if it's feels wrong or suspicious. That's your survival mechanism. And we should always pay attention to that. But for me, when intuition comes to us, it is a body sensation and doesn't come from the head. People talk about gut feel, and I think intuition is more a body sense, whether it's the gut or whether it's a different part of it. But, for me, intuition is like a knowing. Once you learn to trust the knowing, you trust it once and it comes out okay. You trust it again and you trust it again in ever widening circles, in bigger and bigger circumstances. And that's when you know that your intuition will take you so much further than any of your conditioning or any of those safety mechanisms will. I'm not saying we should be unsafe, but, if we look at if we feel that it's some sort of a safety mechanism, and we feel into that safety mechanism, and you can use your intuition at the same time, is this my conditioning, or is this really something that I need to pay attention to? And then the answer will come.
So definitely being more in tune with your body as opposed to the logical side of your brain, and trying to feel your feelings instead of, it feels to me that what we're taught is very much shoving down our feelings when they're inconvenient, right? And just repressing them.
Absolutely.
And I think doing that just prohibits from building a relationship almost with your body, where your body will feel things and you'll trust them. And it's almost like a muscle that keeps building the more you work on it.
It is, and I think the body is a wonderful messenger. And if, say, you have a sore foot, what is that foot trying to tell us? If you lose your voice in certain circumstances, what is the message behind that? The body is trying to tell us something. I've worked recently with people with cancerous tumours, and I say, well, no, it's not a tumour, it's a messenger, and it has been created within a body there, and there'll be a reason behind that. Let's find out why. Is it something that's been pushed down and not listened to? Is it something from the past that wishes to be released? Once you start to see disease as a messenger, or any sort of physical disorder as a messenger, it changes the conversation. And when you get the message, its job is done and it can then go.
That's a really interesting, and I've heard this quite a few times, and I know that our audience sometimes does struggle with, family members, people going through diseases such as cancer, because it's so prevalent right now in our society. So could you tell me more about what disease represents when it manifests into our body? And what are then the steps that you take when you work with somebody with, for instance, a tumor?
Let me talk about the physical, and then I'll talk about the emotional as well, because we do both. There's two types of messages. With a tumor, a recent example that I had, I worked with somebody to get in touch with that tumour. And what I do with somebody is I expand their consciousness outside their body, a bit like NDE, or an out-of-body experience, like you've been talking to people about. And then from outside the body, we look back into the body and we say, what is the greater purpose behind this message? What is it trying to tell you? If it had a voice, what would it say? And often we will be able to uncover what that message may be. Okay, now that you have the message, how do you change your life from the information you've been given? What is it that you can do? And then when the message has been given, some of these tumours shrink. Some of these physical disorders tend to subside. I mean, they've been trapped in the body for a while, so it's not always instantaneous, but they turn the corner and they head back towards health because they then have gratitude for the messenger. That was once the tumour, was once the bad guy, but it's really the good guy who wants them to know something very important. Now, it's hard to generalise, but I did one recently with a tumour that was held in somebody's body. We did this process and we found 5 traumas from past incidents in life that had been trapped, some of them for decades, and the 5 of them had manifested into this physical tumour. Once we understood what the 5 messages were and we unpacked that, she was much lighter. She felt free, and the tumour was ultimately diagnosed after the biopsy of being not malignant. It was safe. It was just a lump. It was a cyst. So it was suspected tumour. We released the traumas. We found out it was a cyst. Now, whether that manifested from the work that we did, whether it was a cyst the whole time, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because that lady is now safe and working her way back to health. So that's one example. And there's others where we've worked with tumours to understand what's happening. If I look at the emotional side, and we are at epidemic proportions of things like anxiety and depression at the moment. And I want to say, and this is my own opinion, my own conclusions I've drawn from over 20 years in this work, anxiety is not a mental illness. Anxiety is a safety system, and it's just turned up too high. And there can be reasons that it's turned up too high. And again, some of that can be trauma. Some of that can be the fact that that person is extra sensitive. There are a lot of people who are very empathic that are here, and then empath type people don't understand where their energy field finishes and the world starts. So when they have that understanding, they can manage the energetic feeds into their system better. Some people who, when mum was anxious, and that was before they were born, when they were in utero, when they were in the womb before birth. If mum was anxious, they were part of her autonomic nervous system. They were psychically connected to mum as well, even physically connected through the umbilical cord. They absorb that anxiety and sometimes are born with a level of anxiety that is higher than what they would have had otherwise. So we go back in time and we release that wave of anxiety prior to their birth and set them free. For empath people, we set them up with a different energetic infrastructure. But anxiety, again, is a message. It's a safety system. It's just turned up too high. We just have to find out why. There's a relationship, I believe, between anxiety and depression as well. And I believe that depression, from what I've seen from hundreds and hundreds of clients over the years, what I've seen is depression is an energetic collapse. And it's like we curl up in a ball because we've had enough. We've been carrying this heavy energy for so long. Sometimes it's been heightened anxiety for many years. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's relationships. Sometimes it's a collapse of old belief systems. But depression is a shutdown that comes from having had enough. Now, I'll work with somebody with depression and we will understand why they collapsed, what were the things in that infrastructure that made them collapse. We go back in time and we release them and we set them free. and raise their vibration.
I have to say, I think anxiety, I mean, it's also something that's very close to my heart because I didn't know the word for it, but I was always a very stressed child. And the kind of thing where you have an exam or so, and it's just, it was stressing me out beyond, I think, any logical explanation. And I think through the years, I've learned to manage it, but it comes in waves. That's the best way that I can describe it, right? There's moments where you feel it more intensely. There's other moments when you seem to just live your life fine despite it. So you learn how to cope with it.
I mean, often anxiety is a lifelong pattern. And sometimes we have to go right back to understand, was there difficulty in childhood that built these safety mechanisms? Was it pre-birth, as I said? Is it something in the family line? Ancestral energies transfer between generations. I find with a lot of people who have had ancestors that were part of the wars in recent history, I find that often they have been anxious about that and they've passed it on down the line. We can always go back and we know that we have a choice of, do I still need to carry this energy? Is it something that really belongs to me, or is it something that I can let go of? Everyone's situation is different, but what we tend to do in our work is that we look in the places that other people don't. Like for anxiety, I always check pre-birth. I always check the client's sensitivities. I check the ancestral lines. For those who believe in past lives, sometimes there are some traces back into other lifetimes as well. And the reason that it's felt in this life, and I call these quantum echoes across time and space, some of those are important for us to understand in this body and this time, because we can set those others free that are outside of our time and space, and we can release a pattern from the lineage of the soul. So, people talk about karma, and, I just talk about ripples across lifetimes. I don't really believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I think karma is more about having another chance. And in these times, with so many more metaphysical approaches available, we can set other versions of ourselves free in other times because they didn't have access to the healing techniques that we have now.
You said something really interesting there, which is that traumas that our ancestors have gone through can still manifest within us today. So we might be suffering or be held back by a trauma that we're not even aware of because it did not happen to us in our lifetime. Can you walk me through how one would be able to begin recognizing if that's the case?
Absolutely. Well, we work intuitively as well, and sometimes if we can't find something in this lifetime, we need to be a little bit more creative in where we look. But I had one client who had a very strong connection to the past that made no sense. And he told me the story of his grandfather, and in World War II, when the invading force came through the small town where his grandparents lived, they came through and they herded everybody into the railway station, and they machine gunned them and killed the whole village. One of them, the young mothers in that group, with her last act in this life, she threw her body across and protected her little baby that she was nursing. Then some people came along and they found that baby. They heard the baby crying. They came across this terrible scene. They rescued that child. I mean, this is in the 1940s in World War II. And they raised that child as their own. That child grew up and had a family. They grew up, they had a family. My client was the grandson of that little boy that survived. He told me his grandfather's story and he was in tears the whole time. He was deeply traumatized by his grandfather's story. Now, my client had never been there. He'd never witnessed it, but that story and the energy associated with it had been passed down 2 generations. So I worked with him to release the energy that he was carrying out of the ancestral lines, and that gave him his life back. He could then tell a story in a way that proved it was part of the family history and not part of his personal trauma passed down through 2 generations.
And how do we begin to recognize when it's even a trauma that we have from our current life, right? Because I think very often we go through life, we just have goals, we have things we want to reach, so we don't really pay attention to what's maybe hurting us and what we're having difficulty moving through, right? We just try not to feel it or to numb it down. That's why we have alcohol, we have drugs, we have all of these coping mechanisms, right, to not feel the bad feelings. So when people talk about trauma, I think it's very rare that we identify it correctly for ourselves. So do you have a process of working with clients to identify what is real trauma that is causing things?
I completely agree with you, Sabrina, that we disguise it through addiction. And addictions take many forms. It may be alcohol, it may be drugs, it may be going to the gym all the time, it may be exercise, it may be coffee, it may be it may be food. So these things that we do to forget the fact that we have a behavior that doesn't fit with what we do. I've tried to give up smoking and I just can't do it. Or I've been drinking too much now for most of my life. It's time for me to understand why. There's a feeling within us that knows something's wrong. And we come to a point in our life where we've had enough. We want to look further for it. And people say, well, a man said to me once, he said, I don't know if you can help me because I have 7 phobias. I'm afraid of heights, I'm afraid of dogs, I'm afraid of flying, I'm afraid of cars, etc. And he listed 7 traumas. I said, well, it's 7 phobias. I said, well, you don't have 7 phobias. You're just doing anxiety in 7 places. And we need to work out why you're doing anxiety, because it's just showing up in those different places, but it's all the same thing. And he was greatly relieved, because he thought he was beyond help. So by looking underneath where all this was coming from, we went right back to childhood and we found that. So we naturally move outside of time and space. That's why we hold things in our energy field from long ago, because our energy field can't tell a time. And if we have a defense mechanism that's put in place when we're 5-year-old, before we're born, a trickle from another lifetime, these things just sit with us in our energy field today. And, in the hands of somebody who understands that energy moves outside of time and space into the quantum field, we can explore where that's coming from in ways that other people can't, and we can set people free. But for people to know that there's a trauma, there's a part of them that always knows something's wrong. There's a part of them that observes their own behavior and says this shouldn't be happening the way it is. And then it just comes a time when they're ready to work with it.
Yeah. Usually I think it takes a lot of pain to be willing to work through it and to finally say, I've had enough, I really need to deal with it.
Yeah, and I call traumas or physical disorders, we naturally move into a state of resonance. We are designed to be resonant with ourselves, with our surroundings, but sometimes things get in the way, whether it's an emotional thing, a physical thing. I call these requests for resonance. They're not traumas. They're not disorders. Medical science and psychological sciences, they love to label things. I don't really like labels. I just see somebody before me and they have something unfolding for them that is an opportunity to transcend. And if we answer that request for resonance, we answer that together, then we can find what's really behind it. And we don't need to necessarily spend a lifetime on medication. I heard said a lot that anxiety needs to be managed. I don't agree. I believe anxiety needs to be set free. We set the client free from that defense mechanism. The anxiety is understood, it is transcended, and that person gets their life back.
That was amazing work. It sounds to me like almost everybody on our planet, right, needs that. Because I think especially today, it's a very fast-paced world. There's a lot of I like to call them artificial stressors, right? Like when you have a deadline or a presentation needs to be so perfect you don't sleep because you're working on a PowerPoint, and it almost seems like you're curing cancer or you're doing something very important, but at the end it's a presentation that's probably going to be forgotten 1 hour later. So it's fine to care about it, it's fine to put some work into it, but when it's stressing you out for days and weeks, it almost seems like this artificial construct that we're made to feel, and we encourage it within ourselves to feel that stress, to feel that pressure. And I think for some of us, we also go further, right? And we rejoice in that feeling, because it means we're doing something important. We have a lot of pressure, therefore we have a good job. We're great at what we do because we care. And that's how it almost seems like there's a spiral, right? And it starts like growing and growing, takes over our lives, and we end up in a burnout, and we don't know why.
I completely agree. The first 20 years of my working life, I was in the corporate environment. I've spent 20 years, over 20 years in this type of work now, and I've seen both worlds. And I look back at a younger version of me and I thought, well, I still think, why did he let himself get so stressed about things that weren't important? And you're absolutely right. You do that big presentation and the people you present to don't think much about it after that, depending on the context and the environment. But, we do this to ourselves, Sabrina, from our own belief systems, from our own lifestyles, from the expectations that we set ourselves up for. We need to be easier on ourselves. We are human and we're not meant to be perfect. We are beautifully imperfect. And every time we are imperfect and every time we have a challenge in our lives or we think we go in a wrong direction, it's just another path of learning.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to talk a bit about the energy field. So we all have energies around us, and I think things like anxiety, or especially when we go into crowded places, when we come into contact with other people and their energetic field, we tend to take some of that for us. So could you walk me through what is happening and how we become susceptible to the energies of others around us? And is there anything that we can do to protect ourselves and protect our energy?
Start at the top and work down. We're all part of the same collective consciousness, the whole of humanity. And we are a huge melting pot of everybody's experiences, past, present, current, future. All of that is one big melting pot of energy, and we have our own piece of that. There are some people who move into an energy field and they're looking for more energy from other people. And these people might be a little bit needy, or they might be people that are looking to gain something from an interaction for people. So every interaction with another person is an energetic exchange, because we all share energy everywhere we go. There are some people who I mentioned before who are empathic, and the empaths, as they're sometimes called, they're the ones that absorb energy from other people. But what normally happens for an empath is that they exchange good energy for the needy energy, and they come away feeling drained. And there's a lot of people listening who may know exactly what I'm talking about. And you go for a cup of coffee with that person who's very depressed and you come away feeling terrible. They go away feeling much better. There's been an energetic exchange. So I talked about, for people who are truly empath, we can do something to help their energetic infrastructure by going back before birth and installing a different type of energetic infrastructure for them where they observe and don't absorb, etc. But what I'd say to people is sometimes we need to support a friend. So what I recommend people do is, when you have one of those meetings and that person is dumping their energy, just visualize it going straight up into the sky. Visualize that energy going up and drifting away, etc. And when you walk into a crowded shopping centre or a football game or whatever else it might be, just gently close your energy up. I'm not big on protection because protection is a response to fear, but I do believe we need to manage our energy fields. So when we manage our energy, we just set an intention before we go into a big crowd or the party you don't want to be at, or, a function where you have family members that you don't necessarily want to see. They're not your favourite ones. Just close your energy field up. Just be polite and kind and all the things that we are, but just set the intention to close your energy field up so nothing can get in without your permission. These are just basic tools and techniques that can help people, but it comes with just a very basic understanding of energy. I'm an energetic being in an energetic environment, and I'll use the analogy. If it's hot outside, you put a shirt on, you put a hat on, sunglasses, you go outside in the hot sun. If it's cold, you put a coat on, you put a scarf on, you might put a warm hat on as you go out in the cold. Same with energy. When you go into an energetic environment, you just get your body ready energetically. Okay, I'm going to go to that place now. I'm not going to take anyone else's energy on. If someone starts to draw energy away from me, I'll leave, I'll change the subject, go and talk to somebody else. But you mentioned before, Sabrina, about intuition. Your intuition will take you to the people that you most need to be with. And if someone doesn't feel right to you, then back your intuition and draw back. It's because your intuition speaks to you energetically. It's the language of the body to speak energetically. And the golden rule is to hang around with people who build your energy and stay away from people who drain it.
Easier said than done, I think.
Can be. In environments, we come across all kinds of people. But there's little ways that we can do, there's little things that we can do that help.
It's very interesting because whilst you were saying this, I was thinking of one of my closest relationships, to be fair. This one friend of mine, she tends to always be in a negative mindset. So always focusing on the lack instead of anything that is good. And very interestingly, I did feel a lot of times that I was coming out of those meetings feeling drained and feeling unhappy, and sort of looking for lack in my own life and things that I can complain about or things that aren't working out for me, which I had worked very hard on identifying the things I was grateful for and focusing on that. So it was taking me away from that. But on the other hand, she would always say that my presence makes her feel so good and so calm, and she gets this amazing feeling when she's with me, and all of those problems and things that she's complaining about just seem to evaporate once she shares them with me. So of course I become then the go-to person, right, for sharing those issues. So it's a relationship that I'm still working through it, and I'm still learning to manage it, because I do think that there's lots of good feelings there and a lot of history. But there's also a need for me to protect my energy, and that's what I've started doing before having any contact with her, so that I do allow her the space, and I am able to give her the space that she needs to talk and to unload, but without me necessarily taking it on or it becoming something that I need to do something about.
This a wonderful example of what I was mentioning before, a personal one for you. And that often happens to people who have a healing vibration around them. So you may have a natural talent for helping people to feel better. What probably serves you is to maybe coach those people towards finding their own solutions, or to ask some of those key questions, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to solve the problem? What's your next step? What can you do to work through this and come out the other side? And how can I help you? So little questions like that start to turn the energy around a little bit. And rather than use their energy for their misery, they can use their energy to their creativity and start to find solutions. Some people don't want to find solutions, of course. And at the end of the day, if you keep asking them those questions, they probably won't come to you all the time.
Exactly. That's also what's happening. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Well done.
With another friend, we're talking about traumas, and I tend to, I always accept what people say, but I am just very passionate about providing space for people to, I think there's nothing that, I think I cannot provide solutions, but I think I can create space for people to figure that out. Which they don't like, because then it's very confronting, right? When you're given that space to deal with your own issues, or you're asked probing questions about the things that you maybe know are not necessarily true, but they may be lies you tell yourself. And it becomes very confronting when people are asking open-ended questions and allowing you to go deeper into those emotions.
And that could be maybe that's the conversation they don't want to have, but it's the one they really need to have. It's so important because energy doesn't shift until we address it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times what I also hear in the comments of our audience is there seems to be relationships like this in the family where there's a lot of emotional abuse, and as a child especially, it's very difficult to identify it. Most times we don't identify it correctly as an adult when that happens, but as a child, if your parent is narcissistic or has an addiction, for instance, that's very difficult for you to understand how to deal with, and you build those coping mechanisms that then prevent you from functioning normally in the world.
And children are very clever. Children will build those defense mechanisms. They are closer to their creativity because they come from a land of awe and wonder, and children in their imagination are incredibly powerful. Children are remarkable and they're very resilient. Not to say every child has a great childhood, but they come up with these incredible solutions that we could probably not come up with as adults. The problem is we move forward into adult life and we still have those structures and mechanisms that we needed in childhood with us still. And a lot of the work that I've done over the years is to help people to understand that the safety mechanisms they put in place when they were small are no longer needed now that they're older. And when those safety mechanisms are retired or transcended, if you like, then that sets the adult free in ways that the child couldn't be. But you've got to have the courage to turn over the rocks and look underneath and see what's there. But at the time, we don't realise as children because we just know the life we have. We have no benchmark. We don't look at, discerning our environment and saying, no, that's not right, that shouldn't happen. We just get what we get and we adapt accordingly.
I wanted to take a minute to reflect on the fact that this is all under the field of quantum consciousness, which I think is fascinating. But I also think that maybe not most of us know what that is. So could you tell me more about what is quantum consciousness to you? And I think also it's something that very often people will say, well, it doesn't apply to me, but it does apply to all of us, right? Because we're energetic beings in this world. So regardless of whether we believe or not believe, it does apply and influence and shape all of us. So tell me more about that.
Okay. Well, we are quantum consciousness. We are part of the quantum field and we are all powered by consciousness. If I look at where the name comes from, first of all, quantum physics is the science of possibility. They talk about the absence of time and space. They talk about time being fluid, space being different. They talk about all of us being empty atoms. So they talk about time and space differently. And they are the science of possibility. They talk about different dimensions, alternate realities, time travel. All of this happens on the back of quantum science. Now, consciousness is the language of the universe. And if we look at energy as well, energy is a construct of the universe. Our consciousness is brings that fabric to life. And our awareness travels around that fabric on that energetic infrastructure. If I make that simple for people, if you look at the ocean floor, that's the infrastructure of energy on which the universe is built. If you look at the ocean of consciousness, that sits on top of that energetic infrastructure. And if you look at our awareness, we're like the sea creatures, and we move around within that ocean, and we have all of these different events and adventures, and all of these things happen to us, and how we work in that ocean of consciousness to digest or to understand or to analyze those events that we have. That's what we do in our awareness. So, we have a lot of free will. We can decide how we hold our past. We can create our own future. We can choose our own beliefs once we get past our conditioning. So I want to say to everybody that's listening that you have incredible power that is beyond your knowing. You have free will that allows you to travel through this universe in ways that you can decide. You can choose your emotions, and if you don't feel you can, look underneath and find out why. We all carry things with us through life. Once we understand the greater purpose behind them, it sets us free. I believe everybody should have a high vibrational life, should choose the life that they want and live it to its full. And you can do that from a place of awareness where you understand your own energy, how you interact with others, how you interact with the world around you. Forget about being a physical being. You're a metaphysical being, and you have all of these different energies and vibrations at your disposal. And go and explore them. Understand the things that hold you back, understand the untapped potentials within you, and have the life you truly deserve.
Peter, how can people connect with you and with your work?
I have a personal website, quantumconsciousness.com.au. That's my individual one. But my organisation that I founded is the Institute for Quantum Consciousness. And that's Institute for, that's FOR, quantumconsciousness.com. And we've got lots of people in different places around the world who are really eager to assist and help people find the lives that they really deserve.